Hi friends, hope you're doing well. We're going to continue our prophecy focus on the Antichrist. This is part 2. I hope you liked for part 1. So part 2, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Time is always so fast, but we're going to jump into it. So anyway, we were going through Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, and he basically just said that he's going to confirm a 7-year covenant. In the middle of that, he's going to go in and stop sacrificing. Well, all those things are alluding to saying, number one, there's going to be Israel has to be back in its land. Their temple's going to have to be reinstated. There's going to be a sacrificial system going on, which means there's mostly going to be a Sanhedrin. There's going to be a high priesthood. Well, guess what? All those things are all in place except for the temple itself. But the artifacts are reestablished. The Sanhedrin's been reestablished. There is a priesthood that's been trained. There was a high priest that was nominated maybe about a year ago. All these things are already in play. All those things are already there. So it goes on to say that ultimately we're going to see this temple that's going to be rebuilt soon. And some of the instability we see happening up on the Temple Mount, guess what? The Temple Mount itself is going to be divided. The land's going to be divided, but the Temple Mount's going to be divided as well. The Bible talks about, which I just previously in first video read from Joel chapter 3 verses 1 and 2. I won't do it again, but basically it's just saying that the land's going to be divided. The land is divided, and it is being divided as part of this peace agreement. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the Temple Mount is going to be divided too, because it's going to get into that in Revelation chapter 11. When we get there, we'll read that, but the land's going to be divided, the Temple Mount's going to be divided, and the outer courts are going to be given over to, I think, where the Al Mosque is and the Dome of the Rock. And in the middle, between those two, I think is where the temple actually will be built, where the western wall is. So you have the western wall here, and the temple will fit perfectly right between the Dome of the Rock and the Al Mosque. So those two are on either side, and then you're going to have the Temple Mount right in the middle of those two, right where the western wall is. Something's going to happen, either discovery, peace agreement, whatever is going to happen, but that temple is going to go right there. Most likely they're going to remove that wall, or at least open up the wall, and then through that will be where the temple is built at a lower level maybe than where you currently see the other religious sites, where the Jews can just walk right up to and into the temple. That's going to be very fascinating to see, and I think it's extremely near, really near. And I think this peace agreement is going to be part of that, maybe usher that in as events are unfolding right now. We're seeing the instability in the world between the nations. We see many nations now really struggling, especially with this COVID thing that's been going on. It's really impacted the world in trade and economics. We'd expect to see that. We really need to see a change in economics if a Antichrist kingdom is going to come into play. And we know that there is going to be an economic kingdom of the Antichrist, that he's going to control all buying and selling from Revelation chapter 13. And we're going to look at that here in just a little bit. So we're going to try to get these in. So we should expect to see that he's going to bring in a peace agreement, 7 years. Okay, is there a peace agreement being talked about? Absolutely. We're going to listen to something real quick, so hopefully this will play out and you guys can hear it.
Until now, former presidential advisor Jared Kushner's new fund, Affinity Partners, has reportedly raised $3 billion, including a $2 billion commitment from Saudi Arabia. At the Trump White House, Kushner helped broker the Abraham Accords, establishing relationships between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. Now Kushner is hoping Affinity will create an investment corridor between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
I think this is a very exciting development. The Saudis want in.
Conservative author Joel Rosenberg is editor-in-chief of All Israel News and All Arab News. He recently led an evangelical delegation I was invited to cover for Newsmax to countries experiencing success from the Accords, which ushered in a boom in bilateral trade. In 2018, Rosenberg was invited to meet Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Jeddah's royal palace, and was invited back to meet privately again in 2019. Rosenberg believes the Affinity investment is one more constructive sign by the Saudis of warming ties to Israel.
Every signal they are sending is positive, and now through Jared Kushner, they want in on the Israeli booming economy.
California has Silicon Valley. Israel's version is Silicon Wadi. Kushner and his team have warned the Saudis they could risk losing out on economic opportunities. Rosenberg describes a new Middle East regional architecture based on technology, diplomacy, and business.
I think the real question here is whether President Biden and his team are going to realize that they are sitting on the opportunity to broker a Nobel Peace Prize winning deal. The mother of all peace deals in the Middle East will...
Interesting. The mother of all peace agreements. I'll put a link into the section for this. This one was a small segment that was done on Newsmax that they were doing, so I give them credit for that. Great series. It's just that, you know, even Christians in many cases I think are blind because they're not looking at what the prophets talked about. They're not, you know, adequately trained, as it were. Even somebody who's written books on the Gog-Magog war, on the rise of the Antichrist, it seems like at least he seems to be missing it. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's fully aware, but he seems to be missing that. You know, that sometimes there's zeal for peace with Israel and his neighbors, and their love for Israel can blind somebody too. I mean, yes, Israel is that God wants them to prosper in their land, but you have to remember Israel right now is one who denies Jesus Christ. And isn't it funny that they're making a deal with Saudi Arabia, who is one who rejects the ideals? As Saudi Arabia is, you know, the chief custodian of the Islamic facilities, as it were, and, you know, Mecca, Medina, and so forth. And it's one in which they deny that God has a son. They deny Jesus Christ. They deny his death upon the cross. Deny every aspect of Christianity and the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And you know, you got to remember, Jared Kushner himself is Jewish. He denies Jesus Christ. In fact, for him to get married, his wife Ivanka had to renounce her belief in Jesus Christ and Christianity and convert to Judaism. That was something that she had to do. As I read about her, I mean, obviously, maybe internally that's not the truth, but at least what's publicly written out there, that's the truth, that she had to convert. Even if maybe she just wanted to, I don't know. But what's written is that for her to marry and a family to be accepted, she had to renounce Jesus Christ and embrace a Messiahless, that's a word, faith, which is Judaism. Current Judaism, rabbinical Judaism, is one they're still waiting for the Messiah to come. We know that they will ultimately mourn for the one when he comes in Zechariah chapter 13, 14, 12, 13, 14, when it talks about them mourning for the one whom is pierced, you know, and then ultimately see him return in chapter 14. Interesting, isn't it? So he's a denier of Jesus. So if there's a rapture tomorrow, guess what? He's going to be still here. And not only that, it's one in which him being Jewish, he would be allowed to go into a rebuilt temple. You know, I think that's significant to remember that. You know, the Gentiles, we wouldn't be allowed to go into the temple. If the temple was built tomorrow, even though they say it's a temple for the nations, it would defile them, according to their own teachings, for Gentiles to go in to the temple. You have to be circumcised. You have to, you know, do all the various laws that they have to follow, because they're still following on that old covenant. Kushner would be allowed to walk in there. Well, guess what? The Antichrist does. He goes into the temple and declares himself to be God. He would never be able to walk in there unless he's just going to do it by force and take over, you know. But in general, I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think he's going to be invited to walk in, and when he does, because he's the orchestrator of peace agreement, that this peace that Israel's wanted so badly, he's ushered in this huge economic thing that I think is going to be hugely successful. So if you got a lot of money and you want to invest in something, maybe this Affinity new takeoff for high technology investment in Israel might be a place to park some of that money, because it's probably going to do extremely well, especially if at what expense and what cost, you know. But at the end of the day, that's, I think, what's going to happen, and I think it's going to be hugely successful. And again, people are going to look at Kushner as this messianic type person, because you got to remember, the Jews look at the Messiah as coming as just a human in a lot of ways, not the Son of God, but one who's going to usher in peace and lift Israel up, and so do a lot of these kind of things, and a lot of things that he's doing politically in this world. You know, they don't see the things about the suffering Messiah and of you know, Isaiah 53, or the virgin birth of Isaiah 7, or, you know, his eternal everlasting kingdom of 9, they would probably acknowledge, but not as a child. They would look at it and go, well, wait a minute. But they look at these kind of things, and I think Kushner fits the bill in a lot of these and will be declared a Messiah. And ultimately, he'll go into the temple, which we're going to come to in 2 Thessalonians, where he declares himself to be God. So in Daniel 9:27, all this is being laid out. So ultimately, it's his destruction, where he's going to be thrown alive into the lake of fire because he's accepted the deal and been possessed by Satan himself and empowered by him. And in it, he's going to deceive the nations, and he's going to usher in devastation on a level that most people can't even acknowledge. And that's where we get back to Daniel chapter 8, where it says that he will destroy many because of it. He's going to usher in the tribulation and the destruction of untold amount of people, and the Holocaust that's going to ensue with those who come to faith in Christ during the tribulation period, we know as the tribulation saints of Revelation chapter 7. Really fascinating stuff, but for that to happen, all these other things have to be in place. Well, what are some of those things? Okay, well, let's go ahead and jump into Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. It says, then talked about this abomination, so we're just going to clarify that a little bit. So therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. So number one, we should expect to see, well, number one, for there to be abomination in a place where it shouldn't be, it's basically alluding to the fact, I believe, of a rebuilt temple. And this temple has to be rebuilt, and we should be seeing signs of organization and events and training of priesthood and all this stuff, and a red heifer and all the things that are needed, and the artifacts and the garments and the the gold menorah and the showbread table, and all these things have to be in place for the temple to be ultimately bring back and be rebuilt. Funny thing is, we see those things. Temple Mount Institute, if you want to look them up, obviously they already have all those things. They have the garments, they have the artifacts, they have the gold menorah, they have the showbread table, they have all those things. They're raising their own red heifer, they are raising their own flocks for the sacrificial system. So that's coming. It's definitely coming. And the foundation is there. The Sanhedrin's been reestablished. They've nominated a high priest, as I previously stated before. All that is already in place. So for there to become an abomination, which is going to have some kind of technology built into it, we're going to look at Revelation chapter 13. So Revelation 13, we'll try not to skip too much because I really want to work through systematically, but I think it's important to kind of look at this. In Revelation 13, he goes on to say that, and he was given, it was given to him, talking about the ultimately the false prophet who's working on behest of the Antichrist. And we'll come back to 13. I just want to read this one little bit. To give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. I think that's that abomination that it's talking about, standing where it shouldn't be. It's going to be placed on the wing of the temple, and in that it's going to be something that people will have to, it'll be interactive, it'll be, who knows, AI driven or something. It'll be a part of it where you can be locked out of the system if you don't worship it. And we'll get that when we get to 2 Thessalonians. But I want to touch that based on that. Not only that, it says what's important, what I really want to touch base on was Matthew 24, which says, then there will be great tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Perfectly falling in line with what we expect to see in Revelation. Mass death on a level that most people can't figure out, even contemplate. But it's going to be at an end times event, and it's going to be unlike any other time in history. Exactly what we kind of would see in Joel chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, but other places as well. But it's going to be a end times event. So people look at this and go, oh, this was talking about AD 70 or AD 132 or whatever, when destruction of the temple happened in AD 70, and no, it's saying that this is going to be a future event. And I apologize for this cough, guys. That it's a future event that's going to happen in which that's going to be unparalleled. It's going to be unique, and it's only going to be a one-time event. It's going to be at the end of the tribulation, which tells us it has to be when the tribulation occurs, and it's going to have to be in what we see in Revelation as we get into it, because it's AD 70 doesn't fit that, and AD 132 doesn't fit that, because we don't see the destruction of the sea, the destruction of all sea animals. We don't see the being turned into blood. We don't see the pollution of all the fresh waters that kill people off through wormwood. We don't see this sky being blotted out for 3 days. We don't see those things. All those things that have to come haven't happened yet. And not only that, you have to have this Antichrist figure on the scene who's declaring himself to be God and controlling the entire world through a marking system. That means you have to have technology. And you have to have a rebuilt temple of Revelation 11 with these two witnesses of God who are, by the way, killed in over a 3-day period of time. The entire world witnesses, which means you have to have worldwide visual communications happening for that to take place, because this is the entire world. People of the world are all giving gifts to each other because these two are killed, and they witness them being resurrected. So that means you'd have to have worldwide communications. How in the world could you see an event happening all around the world? When that was written, it would have taken you months, if not years, to get information from one side of the planet to the other. All the people of the world are going to see this and celebrate and give gifts. It means it's got to happen in a 3-day period of time. That means you'd have to know about it today, go buy a gift, go pass it around and give out gifts and stuff like that in celebration of this thing. A very short period of time for this to happen. It means you're going to, and to be able to visually see the resurrection of these people, you've got worldwide communications and visual worldwide communications of Revelation chapter 11. Pretty amazing. And all that's going to have to happen when you have the Jews back in this land, the reestablishment of the artifacts of the temple, the reestablishment of a priesthood, reestablishment of Sanhedrin, the refocusing, rebuilding of it. And, by the way, you have to have a peace agreement where they're going to divide the land and ultimately the Temple Mount itself, because the outer courts in Revelation 11 says that outer courts are given over to the heathen or to the unbelievers. And we're going to come to that when we, again, working our way forward. I just want to lay the foundation. All these things have to be in play. And instability of the world economically to allow for this beast empire final marking system to come into play means you have to have a new economic system, which means the old system has to be failing. The old system has to be in a place where nations are ready to accept and adopt a new economic system. Guess what? What's going on? Throughout the world, we see a lot of instability in the marketplaces. You see massive debt among all the nations. You see shortages in supplies everywhere. I mean, there's an article about formula for babies being short. You're talking about everything you could possibly think of is short out there. Rubber, metal, steel, everything you could basically think about is having shortages on a level that's been unprecedented throughout the world. What's causing it? What's driving it? It tells you there's a force behind it that's causing this delay in people getting parts and everything else that they need. What force is behind this? What's driving it? It's leading to a global economic system that's going to have to be changed, because you see all these nations who are basically declaring bankruptcy. Many of these nations out there now are declaring bankruptcy, and America's not far away. And I think America will then join in on some type of new economic system, and that new economic system will be the market beast. But not only that, they'll usher in a new alliance of nations for this new empire. America doesn't want to lose its standing as the preeminent nation of the world, but it can't continue to stand the way it is on its own, especially if it's economically failing. So what happens when an empire is waning and it sees enemies around it that are like China and others? What do? You form a new alliance. You form an alliance that makes you stronger so that you have greater reach all around the planet and major trading partners and everything else. That's what you do. You sign an alliance and make yourself part of that, if not the preeminent nation in that alliance. That's what you do, just like anybody else. You see what happens when, like in sports, you see, somebody will leave one conference to go to another conference because they see this conference over here, or they'll form a new alliance because they need to make it bigger, stronger, better, so they're not taking over. And that's the same similar thing you see will happen with America. I think America will be that preeminent nation of this beast empire that's going to come on the scene. So the Antichrist will ultimately have this final empire to lead and deceive the world and have the power to destroy it. This kingdom's only going to be here for 1 hour, according to Revelation 17. And we're going to go through systematic, so I'm going to read these verses. Trust me. Revelation 17, the final verses of that, and verse 12, so forth, are talk about that this final empire that the Antichrist is going to be in control of is only going to rule for 1 hour, or for a very short period of time. So it doesn't have time to come on the scene and then build this massive army and build all this, infrastructure and everything that will go along with it if it's starting from scratch. You're talking about centuries, decades to do that. It won't have time to do it because it's only going to rule for 1 hour. That means the nations that are going to be part of this final beast empire have to be already very powerful nations militarily, and economically combined, they're going to control the world's markets. Well, who do we see doing that right now? We see America instability happening, but we see them very powerful militarily, and pretty much the preeminent trading partner in the world. Even with China, they're still the preeminent trading partner in the world. You have UK, you have, in essence, the Anglo-Saxon Union, and as it were. You see Scotland, you see England, you see Ireland, you see, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America. You start looking at all these, and it's like, well, that's forming very quickly into an alliance of, potentially 10 nations. But at the end of the day, we're probably going to end up with 10 nations, 7 kings, or 7 nations, 10 kings, and the kings just being leaders, and ultimately 3 of them are overthrown, and the Antichrist is the one who overthrows them, comes up. Ultimately, he's leading one of those 7 nations, is what the Bible actually says, and that he ultimately will overthrow 3 and in essence take over, as it were, this final alliance, and those leaders, those 10 leaders, give their power and influence to this Antichrist figure, who then becomes the preeminent leader of this new empire, final one that's going to rule the world, all others. But yet there's still going to be the kings of the east, and others are going to be opposed to him. So it's not like he's going to have total domination over them, but he will ultimately be the leader of the world. Those are things we should be able to see. All right, Mark 13. I just want to make sure that I nail this down. So Mark 13, it just says, verse 14, I think it is, or 24, I think it is, yeah. So, but in those days after the tribulation, blah, 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 he goes on to say that, now learn the parable of the fig tree, and he goes on to say in verses, I think it was, 14 through 19 is what I was actually looking at. He says, but when you see the abomination of desolation, it's very similar, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. And then he goes on in verse 19, says, for those days and at that time of tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of creation, which God created until now and never will. Again, it's clearly going to be an event that will be unprecedented in history. It won't be 80, 70 event like the predators like to talk about or anything like that. This is going to happen in the near future. And it's on the horizon, people. Really close. And I'm not out here banging an alarm just saying, hey, for the heck of it. I mean, we need to be alert, be ready. And that's what Jesus says in verse 35. He says, therefore, be on the alert, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether it is in the evening or midnight, or as the rooster crows in the morning, in case he should come suddenly and find you asleep. And when he says that, he says, what I say to you, I say to all, be on the alert. So he's telling us, be looking, be ready. And how are we looking and ready? Spiritually ready, being in God's Word, being in prayer, praying for the Holy Spirit's guiding and leading, and looking at events that are happening around the world, which, by the way, is a prophecy in and of itself, because how would we be able to know what's going on around the world if we didn't have worldwide media and ability through the internet and so forth to see what's going on around the world? If we were living 100 years ago, we wouldn't have that ability. We'd be waiting to read a paper that was written potentially, as they got information. If it was more than 100 years, you may never hear about events that were happening around the world. We're all instantaneously hearing it. An event happens right now, we know it. I mean, there was a shooting in New York, and we instantaneously knew it within minutes of it happening. It was already being reported. Minutes. It was literally, the police were just showing up on scene. I mean, it was like, wow, that's how fast technology is now, where you can see events happening around the world and it's instantaneously transmitted. Something happens, you automatically know it. Somebody has already got their phone out and they're reporting it, and it's being dispersed around the world. That's pretty amazing when you stop and think about it. So what Jesus is saying is, be looking, be ready, and be on the alert. Well, that's what we're doing with these videos. We're being ready, we're being looking, and definitely, you know, striving to understand what God has planned for us. Anyway, we'll pick this up in the next video. I hope this is a blessing to you. This is part 2. We're going to do a part 3, and then we'll jump into 2 Thessalonians, and then work our way through the final Revelation parts. God bless. We'll see you.